Welcome to Born to Win. I'm Brian Proctor, and I've created these podcast episodes around timeless principles that I learned from my father, Bob Proctor. And when understood and applied, these principles can change the direction of your life. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please like, follow, comment, and share. This helps me to reach more people. Today, I want to ask you a question. Maybe you've heard my father, Bob Proctor, say it from the stage or in a video that you've watched. And that question is this: what do you really want? Now, this is not a question you ask and expect an immediate answer to. In fact, the question itself is supposed to get you to think. Because this is an important question, and the most important questions in life deserve more than a quick answer. They deserve your attention. And if you want to answer it truthfully, you'll have to stop and think. In fact, I recommend you dedicate at least 10 minutes each day to sitting quietly and asking yourself this question: what do I really want? This is not about what your parents wanted for you or what your employer expects from you. This is not about what your friends are doing or what they think you should want. And this is not about what society says success looks like. What do you really want? In my experience, this is one of the most difficult questions a person can honestly answer. Because many people have become so busy living their lives, they've lost touch with who they are and what they want from their life. You know, I worked with my father for 30 years in the personal and professional development industry, and I heard him ask this question thousands of times. And I also witnessed something very interesting that almost always happened. People begin by telling you what they don't want. I don't want debt. I don't want stress. I don't want this job anymore. I don't want to feel stuck. But that isn't the question. Knowing what you don't want may help you recognize dissatisfaction, but it doesn't create direction. Imagine getting into a taxi and telling the driver, I don't want to go north. Well, that's not enough information. The driver still has no idea where to take you. Life works the same way. The mind needs a destination, not just something to avoid. A life without direction doesn't usually end in disaster. It usually ends in regret. You know, there's a quote by Robert Heinlein that I've always thought captures this perfectly. He wrote, "In the absence of clearly defined goals, we become strangely loyal to performing daily trivia until ultimately we become enslaved by it." Think about that for a moment. If you haven't intentionally decided where you're going, it's remarkably easy to spend your life reacting instead of creating. Days become weeks, weeks become months, and months become years. And before long, you realize you've become incredibly productive at advancing someone else's agenda. You've been responding to emails, attending meetings, running errands, paying bills, checking things off of a list. None of those things are wrong. They're a part of life. I'm certainly not suggesting we abandon our responsibilities or ignore the commitments that we've made to our families or our work. Those things matter. But here's the question. While you're faithfully taking care of what life requires from you, are you also making time for what life is calling you toward? Because there is a difference. One is maintenance, the other is creation. One keeps life running. The other determines where your life is going. You might be listening right now and thinking, Brian, I'd love to spend more time thinking about what I really want, but I just don't have time. And I want you to hear me say this. You don't have time not to. Because if you don't consciously decide the direction of your life, life has a way of deciding it for you. Not through one dramatic event, but through thousands of small decisions made by default instead of by design. That's why clarity is so important. Once you're clear about what you truly want, you don't necessarily have to change everything overnight. You simply begin orienting your days in that direction. You write your goal. You read it. You spend a few quiet moments visualizing it. You think about the person you're becoming. And you ask yourself, what's one thing I can do today that moves me a little closer? Oh, it may seem like a small habit. But don't underestimate the power of consistently pointing your life in the direction that you've chosen, because success is rarely the result of one giant leap. More often, it's the result of thousands of intentional steps, all taken in the same direction. Let me repeat that. It is the result of thousands of intentional steps all taken in the same direction. One of the greatest gifts my father gave me was helping me understand that goals are not simply about achievement. They're about direction and the personal growth that we experience along the way. A worthwhile goal gives your mind something to organize around. Without one, it's easy to drift, because it's easy to become busy, but not necessarily productive. When this happens, we're occupied, but not necessarily fulfilled. Think about a sailboat. The wind blows against every boat on the water, but not every boat ends up in the same place. Why? Because the wind isn't determining the destination. The sailor is. By adjusting the sails, by choosing the heading, by deciding where they're going, and being clear on adjustments that need to be made. Life offers all of us changing conditions. The question is whether you've chosen a direction. One of the biggest misconceptions about success is that people believe successful individuals always knew exactly what they wanted. That's rarely true. Most people discover what they really want by being curious and repeatedly asking better questions. The goal you set today isn't necessarily the goal you'll be pursuing 10 years from now. Life has many seasons, and the one you are in now is the result of many things, and that's perfectly okay. Growth changes vision. The experience expands your belief in possibility. The important thing is not having a perfect goal, it's having one that's alive enough to pull you forward. And by alive, I mean you love it. It is what you want, not what someone else wants for you. It's easy to confuse wanting with wishing. But wishing, it's passive, while wanting can be active. When you truly want something, your attention changes. Your priorities change. Your behavior begins to change. You start making decisions that align with it, and then you find yourself taking new and different actions. That's why simply saying, "I'd like to," is very different from saying, "I've decided." A decision aligned with your desire creates movement. Think about someone training for a marathon. They don't wake up one morning capable of running 26 miles. They begin with a decision to complete a marathon. Then the daily runs are all building toward that goal. With the goal, the training has purpose, and the goal changes the meaning of today's effort. One question I like to ask people is this: if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do? It's amazing how quickly answers begin to surface. People suddenly describe businesses they'd build, books they'd write, places they'd travel, conversations they'd have, lives they'd live, and then almost immediately, fear joins the conversation. And you can practically see the cloud of disbelief circling in. That is when all of the limiting beliefs will start to show themselves. I've talked in previous podcasts about belief. Your desire reveals what's in your heart. Your belief often determines whether you pursue it. The mind must be belief, not a mere wish. One reason the question, "What do you really want?" is so important is that your subconscious mind needs a target. You can't hit a target you haven't chosen. Your conscious thinking mind is constantly filtering information. Every single day, you're surrounded by opportunities, ideas, people, and resources. But your mind naturally pays attention to what you have identified as important. That's why when someone decides they're interested in photography, they suddenly notice cameras everywhere. When someone decides to buy a certain vehicle, they begin seeing it on the road everywhere. The opportunities didn't suddenly appear. Their attention changed. The same thing happens with goals. When you become clear about what you really want, your awareness expands. You begin to notice possibilities that had previously blended into the background. Now, I want to say this again. The purpose of the goal is who you become in achieving it. I've seen that proven true over and over again, because the person who reaches a meaningful goal is never the same person who first wrote it down. They've grown. They've learned through failures and successes. They've adapted and expanded. That's the real reward. Think about climbing a mountain. You don't arrive at the summit by taking one giant step. You arrive by taking thousands of small ones. And somewhere along the way, you become stronger and more resilient. The mountain changed you. Goals work exactly the same way. You grow into the person capable of achieving a target that you have set. Here's another question worth considering. Are your goals exciting enough? Because if your goal doesn't inspire you, it probably won't sustain you. Another way to look at this is to think about why you want to achieve this goal. It is often the why that keeps us going, especially when we hit walls. When you have a good why, a why that is connected to your heart, you will keep going. Momentum will build, and that momentum will carry you through difficult days. When your goal genuinely matters, discipline becomes easier because purpose is stronger than inconvenience. Another thing I've noticed is that people often underestimate themselves because they're measuring opportunity with today's ability. Those aren't the same thing. Today's ability, it's not fixed. It grows through your experience of reaching further every day and learning from that stretch. If your goals don't require growth, well, they're probably too small. One of my favorite observations about my father was how interested he was in people's dreams. He wasn't impressed by titles or possessions or status. He wanted to know what made people come alive, because that's where the energy is. That's where commitment comes from. That's where remarkable lives begin. Now let's talk about imagination, because this is where your higher faculties become incredibly important. Before you can build something physically, you must first build it mentally. Imagination allows you to visit a future that doesn't yet exist. Will allows you to remain faithful to it. Belief, it keeps you going. Now here's something I want you to pay attention to. Do you ever hear yourself saying, "I don't know what I want"? The thing is, it's usually not true. More often, people are afraid to admit what they want, because saying it out loud makes you feel vulnerable. It creates the possibility of disappointment or the risk of feeling judged. So instead, people protect themselves by never fully deciding. But indecision, it has a cost. A ship sitting in the harbor may feel safe, but ships were never built to remain tied to the dock. There's a beautiful quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes. He said, "Many people die with their music still in them." I thought about that many times. It's not that people lack talent, but rather they never gave themselves permission to pursue what they truly wanted. Don't let that become your story. So, what do you really want? If no one judged you, if failure wasn't part of the conversation, if you trusted that you were safe and could grow without losing yourself, what life would you begin creating? Sit with that question. Let it challenge you. Because one honest answer bubbling up from your heart may change the direction of your life. This week's Born to Win practice is intentionally simple. Find 30 uninterrupted minutes. Leave your phone in another room. Sit quietly and take out a blank sheet of paper. And at the top, write one question. What do I really want? And then begin writing. Don't edit yourself or judge your answers. Don't worry about whether you're being practical or realistic. Just write. When you're finished, read what you've written. Then ask yourself one final question. Which of these goals makes me feel more alive simply by thinking about it? Circle that one, because that's probably where your next chapter begins. I believe every person was born with enormous potential, but potential without direction rarely becomes achievement. You don't have to have all the answers today. You don't have to know every step. You don't have to see the entire path. But you do owe yourself an honest answer to one question. What do you really want? Your future, it's coming, and it's time to be the director. Thank you for joining me today on Born to Win. If this message resonated with you, please share it with someone who could use a reminder of their own inner greatness. It also helps me to reach more people if you rate and follow this podcast. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Brian Proctor Official. And remember, success isn't about luck or timing. It's about alignment. You were designed for success, built for expansion, and born to win. I'll see you next Monday. Until then, think big, trust yourself, and keep growing.